Uh, my name is Anthony Blake. I'm the research director of the non-for-profit organization, the DuVersity, a very strange name, but it contains the ideas of universality and diversity. And I'm talking with Erik Davis, an extraordinary writer from the West Coast of America. My background starts in physics, which was my first love. And it gave me a chance to meet up with that extraordinary man, David Bohm, the physicist, and other extraordinary men afterwards, amongst whom I will include John Bennett, who was one of the main pupils of the extraordinary spiritual teacher, George Gurdjieff. So I had these two strong influences in my life. And since then, I've been exploring the ramifications of this. And like anybody else in this time period concerned with what is true, how can we understand each other, what's happening to us, are we in control of anything, and all these various sorts of deep questions. The main, I could only say the main kind of axis of my approach in various methods and searches of epistemology and knowledge and so on is centered on dialogue. And this is a dialogue which was fostered by David Bohm, even though it has its roots in Plato and all of that. And it's around this idea that there is some process by which what is between us can become articulated. And I'll just add here one of the slogans of one of my mentors in dialogue, Patrick Demurray, who always insisted that what he called mind was not in brains, but between brains. And I've taken this absolutely literally and found it an inspiration. So in various avenues, I'm exploring this. And as part of it, of course, writing books, as probably Erik knows, writing books is a kind of yoga. And because there is a need or some kind of intrinsic sense that articulating what is within us matters. And I'll have to end with one of my favorite quotes, which was from Ezra Pound, when he translated the Confucian Analects, and he ends with a wonderful sort of couplet saying, when he's searching for the origins of what is order and meaning, and he said, it is to render into words the inarticulate, the still tones of the heart. And that's what I feel I'm trying to do. Over to you, Erik.
Oh yeah, that's beautiful. There's so many resonances there because, one of the things I do on my podcast, which is one of the main things that I do now as a public intellectual writer guy, is what I call cultures of conversation. And I'm interested in how conversation or dialogue opens up something that's very different than an interview. And, sometimes it becomes kind of an interview. You wrote a book. I'm going to ask you about your book. But there's always a space or an invitation for something else to kind of happen. And I've had a little bit of experience with formal dialogue. We were using some techniques from Bohm, some drawn from other sources. Some of the people that I did it with, unfortunately, sort of briefly, the group kind of dissolved. But it really blew my mind, and I've been looking for more work like that. Because there's a yoga of articulation in writing. Absolutely, I'm blessed and cursed with that drive. If I haven't been writing in too long, I kind of feel like everything's getting sort of just mucky and unclear. It's
That's
not
right,
like
you start feeling ill.
Yeah. So it's part of healing, and maybe it's also partly of there's a neurotic element to writing too. but that's the grit and the pearl. But there's something else that happens in articulation, in conversation, in unscripted conversation, particularly in front of people. I mean, I was just doing a guest lecture in a class that a friend of mine is teaching on music, and they read a book of mine about Led Zeppelin, and we were talking, and I forgot I hadn't been in a situation where I was sort of open to questions. And you never know what you're going to get. And I love the spontaneity of watching what comes out of one's own mouth in
Isn't it?
relation
Yes.
to a question that you've never gotten before. And you're like, wow, that's great. I mean, it is me, but it's not me. So I love all that you're talking about in the course of your own exploration. Really fascinates me, particularly because this is like one place that I'm really curious, because I think a lot about this issue of teachers versus in spirituality or psychospirituality or in personal growth and even in intellectual growth. The difference between teachers, which is sort of a more traditional model, and a more horizontal, conversational, dialogic, meshwork kind of model. And, as far as I can tell, I don't know that much about the Gurdjieff work, but I know a fair amount about the history, and I read, some of the books and things, that he was very much teacher with a capital T. And it sounds like Bennett as well, though he fostered a very multi-dimensional, multi-discourse, he was a very rich thinker. And so he loved lots of different kinds of discourses. He was still very much like the man in a lot of ways, as far as I can tell. So what I'm curious is, you coming out of that tradition, how did you come to your own ways of thinking about the difference or the different strengths and weaknesses of teachers versus a more dialogic, let's explore, horizontal kind of path, which is what I sense is more your love at this point in your own process?
Well, starting with the one of the big questions, and my God, this is so exciting. You see, I think I was very fortunate. There are always, particular features in one's life, and particular accidents and combinations which flavor everything, and they're not to do with one's wisdom or anything else like that. And I was very young when I came across Bennett. I was about 19, something like that. And my interest, as I said, was in physics. And I'd come across the ideas of Gurdjieff from Colin Wilson in his famous book, The Outsider, and picked up on it, and eventually got to see the man himself. But what was happening in me was this sense of, almost I could say, a fear of the unknown. Because like you and many people maybe watching this will say they go along in ordinary society, they grow up it, and they feel something's wrong. People are faking it. They don't know what they're doing. In fact, it's all a show. And where is it? You look within, and there's like this void, and there's nothing, and there's no answers there. There's nothing laid on. And there are those people who've got tablets of stone and blueprints, but you turn not to trust them. All this kind of thing. So it went on. So one thing about Bennett now, next thing to get on to, which I always appreciated, he had a scientific background. Now that matters a great deal, because he had actually some concrete understanding of evidence and theory, the difference between the two. And he was also capable of changing his mind and learning and so on. And we were fortunate. He wanted to develop his own ideas, which are in this book, The Dramatic Universe, but he wanted to do it in a way which he had carried over from his work, which was in managing scientific research. So he's used to being with people who are creative, you see, not just students, but equals. And so he treated those young people like equals. And we'd have these discussions, these free-flowing discussions about things. But at the same time, just as you say, he was being the master, and he had hundreds of people coming to groups. Now, I also saw that, in these groups which are being run, and where there was somebody in charge and information being passed over and a certain kind of hierarchy and all of that, that it reached a certain level. And Mr. Bennett himself was always after what was the next step, what was the better step. And he'd try and invent new things for the groups to do, and new kinds of groups and all the rest of it. I began to realize this was not the point. And the whole thing was the setting of groups was what was mistaken. And I asked him about this. I won't go on too much longer because I don't want to hog the space here. I've even asked him personally about this particular question. I don't know if you probably know Gurdjieff's idea about Kundabuffer.
It's good for you to explain.
Okay. He claimed in his mythological book, Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson, that the higher powers implanted this organ at the base of the spine to distort our perception, in fact, to see reality upside down, because there was a fear that if mankind was aware of its function in the planetary system, which was to feed the moon, they would be so desperate that they'd commit suicide and the whole thing would break down. So you had to plunge man into illusion so he would stay alive and not commit suicide. And then they found out this was perhaps not a good idea and took the organ away, but we got used to it. And so we carried on doing that. And I said to Mr. Bennett, is there such a thing as a Kundabuffer for groups? Because I tried experience with groups. You get groups together, no kind of authority, and they're useless. Nothing, it falls apart. Nothing gets anywhere. They get in each other's way and so on. Is there a way? And he admitted he didn't know. And I found out, following that up, that in this Gurdjieff work, other spiritual groups, they knew very little about group psychology, group process, or anything like that. And so later on, I was lucky to have a conversation with Charles Tart about this. So there it was, this man who I adored and loved, who had these wonderful conversations with, who developed these incredible ideas. I was on this path of wanting to take what he had in the sense of next step, and saying the next step had to involve suspending the hierarchy and the systems. Maybe it was needed to bring people to a certain point, and then perhaps try and make this the final point, because I'm bursting with wanting to explain to you about everything. It's rather like, you see, in Gurdjieff's books, he wrote 3 major books. Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson, a whole cosmological mythology, you see. Then second was Meetings with Remarkable Men. And the third one, Life is Only Real Then When I Am, corresponds to what I call the European tradition of the Confessions. It's very, very extraordinary. But the second one was all about working with others. It was a group of friends. And I hooked on that and I said, well, let's say we are the remarkable men and get it on.
Yeah.
So that's where I am. I better stop because I shall.
No. I knew. Well, I mean, I of course would just love to hear you go on, but I have thought about this a lot. Because there's a lot of reason to look at the creative edge of human culture, and not even just human culture, but the way in which we as sort of thinking, responding subjectivities are woven into the world, to look at that in terms of friendships, interactions, connections, meshworks, rhizomes, not trees, hierarchies, mountains, all these sort of older archetypes. And so that kind of runs into this issue with spirituality, because so much of spirituality takes this form of a master-student discipleship. We see it repeating it again and again. One thing that I think of is, if you look at, anthropologically at early human groups, and even some groups today, tribes that practice certain kinds of like nomads, where they get together and they have all their cattle and they move across the pass to get to the low pastures, in the winter, and then they go back. And if you look at other groups that have these kinds of focused necessity for leadership, what happens often is that it's a pretty loose scene. Then there's the need to lead the group over the pass to the pasture. And so then a hierarchy appears. The hierarchy is temporary. And so for a period of time, there's a leader who has to command and control and organize people. And then you get somewhere and it dissolves. So it's not about completely destroying hierarchy. It seems like more a kind of allowance. And even in a conversation among equals or among scientists, let's say, when you're giving your spiel, you kind of rise a little bit. You've got some wisdom and background that I don't have. And it's actually clearer to let you sort of go up for a spell. And then maybe we start asking questions and then you kind of go down. So it's more like, people going like this rather than like absolute flatness, because that's a problem too. People get in these sort of political groups or anarchic groups, whatever, and they hate hierarchy so much that they can't get it going. And so everything is consensus, everything is flat, everything is, and it creates its own kind of neuroses and poor power games. So it feels like it's a very subtle thing to do, but one of the wonderful things about conversation or groups of friends exploring a shared topic is that kind of movement is easier to happen because there's already an emotional sort of sense of good humor and goodwill.
That's right. I mean, you're just jumping in here. Interesting, just the accident of language, you started going flat as a flat, and it's got the connotations of being flat, you see, because, of course, its intelligence begins from contrast, from difference. And you can have that kind of flat with everybody's nice and agreeing and so on. It's not worth going there at all. It's just too tedious for words. But you get this, I'm going to scatter with various things now, I've got this obsession about groups and hierarchy and some sort of aphorisms about it. One of my favorite aphorisms is to say that when you join a group, you lose half your will. Because it's put into the structure, you see. And to belong to the group, it's actually literally true. I won't defend it quite now at this point because you could probably argue with it. Now, second thing I want to put in is I got from my friend Gordon Lawrence, who was in the Social Dreaming Matrix. You may have looked at my conversation with him. And he adopted it from some of his friends, which was to say that conversation is typified by two kinds of what he calls politics. And he talks about the politics of salvation and the politics of revelation. And this is a slightly strange terminology. Politics of salvation is when there is a leader, where there is authority, where there is a consultant, whether there's a problem solver, whether there is the divine being, whatever it is, who comes into the group and saves them, who leads them, and all this kind of thing. But the politics of revelation is when the people are able to articulate from amongst themselves, and this corresponds to what I say, mind being between brains. And the third thing I say is, Marco Men, the thing about the people on the same level, which was a strong thing for Patrick DeMari, who taught me about dialogue and so on. You have to be on the level. But I suddenly realized this is the most aristocratic state possible. Because it's only it's the best who can be on the level. In ordinary life, you never get it. So it turns on its head. Actually, to do this horizontal thing, you have to become the utmost elite.
That's hilarious. Yes, you're very right. People forget. I mean, I think on the level isn't used as much as it once was in kind of casual speech, but we still hear it. And of course, that level, it's a direct Masonic reference. And the issue of it's the level, so it's you're in the club, you're in the wink, and that's a funny thing when you look at societies, whether they're secret societies or fraternal organizations or however you want to call them, is that you see this combination of hierarchy but driving towards some kind of desire or dream of a nice fraternal flatness where we're all together. There's no hierarchy anymore, but it requires so much hierarchy to kind of make that, make that happen. I think about I was just talking about the Bohemian Grove the other night, and that's this sort of gathering of men, of powerful men from around the world, different countries, different politics, music, whatever. And it happens here in California. And some conspiracy theorists are very like, oh, this is like the dark side, and they have some strange ritual. And they do actually have some curious rituals. But my interpretation of it always was that it was a place where people who have to carry, whether you think they're monsters or not, in their ordinary life, they have to carry such a burden of power, of making decisions that have huge influences, of always being seen, of not being able to make a mistake. And they go together, and then they can just basically just get drunk and party and be with their buddies, because you can't do that even at the country club. You have to create some very strange structure to kind of get relief, that way. But we're on the outside of that. I don't want that thing. I don't want to be inside of a secret society. I don't want to be inside of a hierarchy where you finally get that. I want that open sort of democratic, like you say, it's never on the level. It's always kind of revised and made up as you go along. I wanted to say one other thing about science. I think that you mentioned Bennett's not just interest in science, but experience with scientific practice. And I think that's when people talk about spirituality and science, often they think of science as like a set of principles about the world, or a set of ideas. And they go, oh, well, how will spirituality go with quantum physics? And quantum physics tells us this. Whereas what's really important is the method of science. Constant inquiry, fallibility of theory in relationship to evidence, a great respect for empiricism, a knowledge that you can use evidence that other people have, but you got to kind of vet it in other groups, and that groups of people with similar values are extremely important to help vet things. That's the stuff that we really need, I think, as seekers, as people interested in a larger view, more than ideas about quantum physics, ideas about cosmology. Those are great. Let's go for it. But it's that feel. And I really sense from learning more about Bennett, partly talking to you, just the whole idea of how you run a university-like situation, how you approach different kinds of knowledges is committed to that idea that you need to have a kind of group inquiry that's going on, where I am responsible for my own inquiry. I'm taking it seriously. I'm earnest about it. I'm serious about it. I'm self-critical about it. But I'm also part of a group, because if it's just me, it's just solipsism, it's craziness, whatever. But if I'm part of a group, we can have that scientific commitment, even if we're not doing science exactly.
Oh, this is so rich. Let's throw in everything first about equality. It's like the Pythagorean ideal, of course, in friendship, which entails this challenge of, you can only have true friendship between equals. So what is this equality? And that's one of the art of friendship. It's not, you can't take it for granted. So that's one main thing. Now, so that's something we had, like in this conversation here, we're engaging in this. It's as you probably feel it as I do, when you sort of get it right, there is not so much to you and me anymore. There is just a conversation. And that corresponds to what, as you probably know, Bohm was after in dialogue and translating it as dia and logos, which means through meaning. It's not a chit-chat between two people, it's going through meaning, and you follow meaning. But the new thing I wanted to introduce, because I want to have some element which is going to connect out to your Techgnosis, is, and the Demiurge, I want to bring in the Demiurge in here, is one of Bennett's passions was higher intelligence. Now, very briefly, to encapsulate what he had in mind, or may have had in mind, is so hard, but it certainly had a religious base for him about this higher intelligence. And his constant reiteration was, though, like in our world problems and situations, man can't solve them by himself. He needs this higher intelligence, so we've got to learn to communicate with higher intelligence. Now, he spoke about this not as a kind of the usual flim-flam, of conversations with God or whatever it is, and you can get supposedly into a trance and receive these messages. But this very important notion about different orders of intelligence, that was very important for him. And to say that there is a sort of vertical ecology going on. And let me add, two ideas, so I don't wrap it too much. One was to say, he got into such question, what is the body? What sort of bodies does higher intelligence have? And he said, well, their bodies are made of ideas. Ideas are their bodies, equivalent to their body. I just thought it was a very neat idea, this kind of thing. Now, and the other thing I wanted to throw into it, to try to nudge towards technology, was that he spoke about them using the old Greek term demiurge, comes from Aristotle and Plato, which meant worker rather than angels and so on. And the demiurge is, in a sense, I want to raise this image with you, is the archetypal engineer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, one of the things I did in Techgnosis is kind of trace the mythic and even kind of mystical sort of implications of the engineer, which is such an important figure to modernity. It actually relates to masonry, the level and the square, and it's all about engineering and the idea that you can engineer a better world, a better society. And from where I come from, the kind of politics I've come from, the kind of background I come from, I'm very wary of that kind of demiurgic behavior, because I'm much more on the techno-critical side. And so I look at the history of Europe, let's say, as a glorious wonder, a singular event in mankind's history, but the dark side of the engineering arrogance, the desire to make and control and to even make utopia, like we can do utopia, is that it falls. It's always another kind of power game, and it has a very strong dark side. So it's funny, even the word demiurge, if you know your Plato, you're like, that's the demiurge, is the higher intelligence that created this extraordinary cosmos. But if you come from a more Gnostic background, the demiurge is the mischievous buffoon.
He's
and I think unfortunately, we're in the era of the, if we look at human society as being controlled by larger organizations, i.e. corporations, institutions, capital flows, massive technologies that are out of the control of any one group, that we return to kind of a demiurgic space, but it's unfortunately more the unpleasant buffoons than the enlightening cosmology aligners, which I think we find more in nature. So just one more idea, when you talk about higher intelligence, that's an interesting topic. I have a lot of thoughts about it. I just wrote a book that was about people who thought they encountered high intelligence, and what could this actually mean? How can we understand it in a way that stays close to the earthy facts of the matter? But one place I think we really do see it is when you start to recognize the intelligence in nature, the intelligence in anything from like a slime mold to a plant, and the ways in which the more and more we know about how trees or forests operate, you have to see them as intelligent in some sense. It doesn't mean the intelligence is in a brain in one part of the stem of one particular plant. It means that there's some way in which the interaction itself stages or allows to emerge a kind of intelligence that involves multiple entities. And I think that's part of where we are, is that we're pulled into all of these multiple entities, and some of them are very nefarious. Some of them are technological. Those don't necessarily entirely overlap. Some of them are natural. Some of them are preternatural, that this process of building does lead to effects and experiences that you can't entirely account for with a purely naturalistic guise. But it's like everybody's out there clamoring for our attention.
Right.
So how do you navigate? How do you navigate all the possibilities, the disaster scenarios, the authorities, the arrogances, the different spiritual frameworks? Do you have a kind of logic? Do you go by intuition? Is it dreams? Is it spontaneity? What are your tricks, man?
Well, that's so much. I mean, how can I just manage this situation where there's being in a flood? But I want to sort of insert something. You hold on to that. Insert something which
Absolutely
to say that. Just to remind people who may not be aware, in the Gnosticism, by and large, you say the Demiurge is the false god, and there's the appeal to wake up from the dream world which the false god creates, and it's so much like what's going on in certain aspects of technology, and become aware of the real god behind it, and with it comes the technical notion that the Demiurge is creative, but there's something beyond creativity. And for Bennett, this was a unity of energy or love or compassion. And further, it's an interesting feature of the Demiurge that in traditional societies, you see, the figure of the Demiurge is the potter. Why the potter? Because the Demiurge works with matter, which is already there. It doesn't work from nothing. Only the true God works from nothing. Yeah, that kind of thing. Then, I was preparing, I've got a whole spiel to go on the Garden of Eden and why this relates to the Matrix. And
it's just endless, man.
It is endless. But you asked this practical question. And it is, it goes, well, for me, it goes back to my subjective history, to the first question I asked Mr. Bennett. And, eager young chap carrying his Beelzebub's tales, going down to see the great man. At that time, the great man was living in his place, which was being taken over by this spiritual movement, Subud. And so he was just writing his books and just hanging around. And he was poor man was I'll tell the story, coming up to his lunch, and I ambushed him. He said, Mr. Bennett, I have got a question. And I thought, I'm going to ask him a very big question. So I said, Mr. Bennett, what is original sin? I thought, that's a good question. I'll get my money's worth with that, you see. And it was so interesting, his reply, because he had this practice. It was part of his own spiritual practice. No matter what idiot came up to him, whatever stupid question, he would stop and listen. This was his own practice. He was amazing. His patience was extraordinary. And wait and come. And so he said, and this was surprising, he said, it is really to fail to do what you can do and to try and do what you cannot do. And this has stayed with me. Because if you look towards this realm of can, I've found the best sort of guide in this respect. And it's quite a good guide because in our present world, everybody's full of what the answers are and what you should do, what you shouldn't do, and all this kind of thing. You see very little attention about can. And this theme of can is very strong, what we call the fourth way, because Gurdjieff put it as you say, you wish to be a Christian. That's fine, you wish to be a Christian, but are you able to be a Christian? Because you have to be able. And you have to begin to learn pragmatically, to learn what are you able to do. And there was a wonderful passage from one of my heroines, I don't know if you know about Simone Weil, where she says, do not act above the level of your virtue. If you do, you poison. You get this poison. So my direction is all around this, what can I do? And it was represented by a friend of mine actually he was the key engineer in the Biosphere 2 project, which you might get into. And he talked about a meeting in which they have problems, they're going around what to do, all the rest of it. He said, well, in this situation, there are things that I can calculate. So I'm going to go away and calculate them and then come back. Now that for me was perfection. He wasn't solving problems. He was doing what he could do. And then he stops. So that's the best answer I can give.
No, I like that idea of thinking about original sin and as partly an overleap beyond what you can do, because that requires you have to have some self-knowledge before you set yourself the higher goal, and also because we get into this, so easy to get into the situation where you set your goal just higher enough that you will always fall short, and then you get into a kind of flagellating cycle of like,
Oh yes,
missing the
oh
boat
yes, yeah,
constantly. And
yeah.
then it's, sometimes, and I think people sometimes go through their whole lives like that, and then something shifts and they can look at what their actual life was like, or what they could do was like, what they did do was like, and they see it in a very, very different way, because they're no longer constantly pulled to that level above. And that's one of the hard things about, I think, contemporary society, is that we have so much feedback, so much of it fabricated, of that next level, whatever it is, the expertise, the yoga mastery, the non-dual consciousness, the entrepreneurial, and everybody's presenting these egos. And, I feel like a fool, because when I wrote Techgnosis in the 90s, a lot of my friends and I were influenced by postmodernism. We kind of distrust the ideal of the individual. And we saw this new technology of networks, of virtuality, of more malleable senses of identity, is that we were like, the individual is going to get swallowed up by this really fast, and something else is going to happen. But right now, it's all retrenchment. It's like even more ego, even more specific self-identity, selfie, social media, all the kind of fame mechanisms and likes and followers, and it's not. I'm like, come on, man! I'm not getting the future I thought we get. But I guess that's part of the game as well.
Sorry, I'm just feeling, we really need 5 hours to begin, kind of thing. Well, so one of Bennett's things, he was just part of his background. He could have become a Labour MP. His orientation was socialist, you see, but he came from a sort of semi-aristocratic family like that. But he was into history, extraordinary historian, and had this theory of epochs and changes of epoch and so on. So towards the end of his life, he came up with this scheme, or into the synergic epoch. Now, let's point out to people, you've got to go back to the origin of that word. The origin of synergy was one time, about the 12th century, I think, a heresy in Christianity, because it claimed that man could actually contribute to his own salvation, be a partner with God on saving his soul. And the main part of the church, this was anathema, because only God can save, you see. But then it came down through the ages to get Buckminster Fuller, and synergy is this working together. It's gone on the level. So his idea of the synergic epoch has got taken up in terms of, he gives examples like this, even the Communist Manifesto in 1858. And cooperation for people. And people get it wrong, because that's nice. People are going to cooperate together. That's lovely. We'll build a kind of common mind and that sort of thing. But his thing about the synergy, which is very difficult to grasp, was that it was a cooperation between levels. And in this prime kind of thing, and it became his hobby even, it was like to cooperate with higher intelligence. So it's not, we have a role, and that lot has a role, you see, but we can get it on together. Now, this is, of course, quite weird, because it's completely the vertical thing. And usually you get the sense of levels. The thing on the higher level, so to speak, absorbs the lower level, encompasses it, and knows on the idea that we can have a level. But that's extraordinary part of Bennett's thing, and the thing Gurdjieff too. And that's why Bennett called his own book The Dramatic Universe, because it's all risk-taking, hazard, uncertainty, but it's like roles. You've got to play roles. And that was one of the saving graces, going back to groups and so on, I've held on to very much. Never get into that position where you get stuck with being the leader or the pupil. It's a role. Shift over, and it's like, your turn, you be the leader now. And it's not completely arbitrary, because we used to do this. And I always said, if you're leading a group, you should never keep on just being the leader, because something will rotten happen to you, this kind of thing. So that's to do with this cooperation, and why I have this title for my forthcoming little seminar. I hope this will be part of a brave new world, with its two senses of the words of Miranda in The Tempest, which has such creatures in it, which is joyful. Brave New World, Aldous Huxley, which is dystopia, you see. And Bennett's thing. And, I have to add one more thing. I'm feeling so embarrassed. I'm talking so much. I want you to talk about your stuff, you see.
No, this is good.
This is good. Because as a Christian, it's a very interesting part of Christianity. Certainly not what's happening in the right wing in America and so on. But that part of it, which he really believed, is how you see things matters. And this has got nothing to do with being optimistic or pessimistic and so on. But though there is a remark to be made, as you know, there is almost a technical term, which I can't remember, of the tendency a lot of people have to always fixate on the negative, on the down, on the darkness. And he was always advocating a kind of perception which wasn't rose-tinted, but literally, as in the Bible, saw the good. But saw, it was a perception. And that was really what he wanted to develop in people. It doesn't matter whether they're happy or sad, that's irrelevant.
Yeah, that's always been one of my favorite aspects of some Christian thinkers, is a certain way of thinking and perceiving joy and goodness, even in the midst of dark situations. And again, not the rose-colored glasses approach, but more the kind of both the sort of humorous foolishness of human beings in all of their foibles, but in the midst of that, this kind of glowing potentiality or glowing essence. And I think about that in terms of the difference between happiness and joy. Like, I think the quest for happiness, the great American shibboleth, MacGuffin, is really more likely to cause its opposite. At least it seems to, certainly on a systemic level. If you have a bunch of individuals seeking their happiness, they run roughshod over a lot of things on their way, at least in the way we do it these days. But joy for me has a very different quality that can coexist in the midst of very difficult situations or very stark confrontations with other aspects of reality. And it's almost more of a kind of amazement and a sort of sense of blessing that even in the midst of difficulty, and there is this kind of wondrous charge. And again, it's not at all rose-tinted glasses, but it does have those elements that we also see in joyful situations in a more conventional sense. And to me, I think a lot of spiritual work is to be able to generate enough joy to see through the illusions of pursuing happiness and have the capacity to turn and look and embrace greater and greater difficulties, both of our moment, of ourselves, of nature of existence. Some things look quite dark, some things are scary, some things are even demonic. And yet we have that capacity to bring a kind of open-heartedness into those situations, because we no longer think about happiness as the goal, and yet we get this divine joy in the midst of it, at least some of the time. That's the plan anyway. I don't know.
In one of his writings, Bennett said, which was about values and so on, that joy is the highest value of nature. And it's something in joy, which is, you see, happiness is so much like a human thing or personal thing kind of thing. But joy, the birds are joyful, the flowers are joyful, the sky is joyful, isn't it? And that part of I think the release it gives us, Eric, because we don't have to have it as ours. So we don't have to kind of tend because it's all around us. Now,
Yeah.
I see you're looking at the clock a bit. So how much time we got? Like 2
We're doing good. I'll let you know.
You let me know. You're a good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that makes me think a little bit. Also, you made that wonderful point. I think it was Bohm about mind. It's not just I have a mind, you have a mind. Mind is something that happens between us. And
Patrick tomorrow. Yeah.
Oh, Patrick tomorrow. Okay, excuse me. But that idea of a field and being sensitive to this field that's surrounding us rather than what we have in our skulls. And what's interesting about that idea is even some very reductionist, materialist brain scientists believe that. Even people who are like, we're all just DNA robot meat machines, trying to make sense of this thing. They'll go, actually mind is a distributed process. It's in our things. It's in our books. It's in our architectures. It's in our structure. It's in our language. It's in memory, which is not in here. And if we go looking for it in here, we're not going to find it. So even from a very kind of materialist in a philosophical sense perspective, there's reasons to think about mind as being something collective or something that emerges between us. And that seems very much to be what the leading edge of evolution is calling us to kind of engage with now. And my hope is that we're just in this sort of last ditch egoic phase, and that we're going to burn through it before we burn ourselves up. Oh man!
But it gives this further thing to describe what you see about how you strive for this independence or a Jungian individuation or Gurdjieff having your own eye, whatever it is. And that's the question itself, the spiritualization. But then the other thing is then when you got them independent, then when they come together, they can make something together, which neither of the two would have thought of. It's an ordinary naive idea, but it's correct. It's correct. We have this very common word used now about relationship, relatedness, but you go into that, the between. Because in a way, in what's between is nothing.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's the liminal.
So you can develop from, there are these differences and you get a gap. You don't run away from it. Oh, let's resolve our differences. No, you celebrate the differences. This kind of thing.
Yeah. It's a respect for the between. And we don't use that word enough or that concept enough. You're right that we think of relationship, we go to that right away. But in a way, relationship is like two well-defined things that have a line between them.
You got it. That's
if instead we kind of lean into the between, your between is maybe my between. It's maybe a third character. It's not so coherent as a relationship, which has its own laws or whatever. The between is, we don't know how close is it. I have betweens inside my own mind. I have betweens between people, with other things, with the cosmos. And there's something about the open-endedness of the between that is really key, I think, in this dialogic process.
Now, Eric, what about considering the in-between between us and machines? Because isn't it becoming not just a fantastic notion? There's some kind of simulation or appearance of sentience, because of course how it's being treated is, there are this AI, this artificial intelligence evolving this way, and here are the people over here. But that's not really the situation, because the two of us are kind of changing.
It's true. And even if and in fact, that's a really wise point, because a lot of the roboticists and artificial intelligence folks that I know personally, partly because of my own background and people I've happened to know, a lot of them emphasize, as opposed to the kind of mainstream view where there are these great self-contained artificial intelligences are going to come down and make decisions for us, that's a really false model. It's both dangerous politically, but also in a lot of ways not really true. It's not really what happens. We're really in a situation of kind of augmentation or hybrids where beings have to develop ways to interact with forms of intelligence that themselves are being organized in relationship to human beings. And you can be very dystopian about this stuff, but there is also a way in which, we already do that. We are already, in highly complicated environments and very dangerous environments in the floor of the ocean and in space. You already have non-human intelligence machines and human beings interacting in very rich ways. So in some sense, I think the right thing to do is to imagine these kinds of hybrid forms of consciousness and to work on them, because the opposite is the other thing that would happen is just the AI on itself is the one who knows, and we are just its little underlings, because it's not going away. The computer intelligence is not going away.
No, it is not.
So I think hybridization is paradoxically a more humanist response in a lot of ways.
I just throw in that I remember reading it years ago, a lovely little science fiction story by Frederick Brown about the supercomputer being built, and they switch it on and they ask the key question, is there a God? And the lightning flash comes and fuses all the circuits so it can't be switched off. He says, there is now.
I hadn't heard that one.
Frederick Brown is.
Now, I guess we only have a couple of minutes left, but I'm curious about, there's a certain stage in people thinking about synergy, people thinking about higher orders of mind, of higher orders of organization, of these sort of higher intelligences, that at a certain point in the 20th century, people were looking at like technology and communication networks and the globalization, and they said, that's it, that's what's happening. But now it doesn't necessarily look so rosy. How do you see this fragile but very potent idea of higher intelligence working? Is it expressed in technology? Is it actually on another order, something more cosmological, or even something more natural, more biological? Is the technological forms of higher intelligence, are they more usurpers, demiurges in the Gnostic sense? Or is there still something happening on a higher scale that's reflected in the development of network consciousness?
Well, I don't mind pretending to know some answer to this, as long as you know it's an act.
I thought maybe you had a good dream or something. Maybe you knew another science fiction.
For me, what comes to my mind, I got too much of the style from Bennett, because he does, people ask him strange questions, he'd go quiet for a while and come up with something weird. So I've trusted in that. And it is something currently for me, is this thing which we know the words for. There are many worlds and many levels, and we're all used to this sort of thing, but for me it's becoming more and more real in the sense of coterminous or parallel or mutual worlds. It's, again, going back to Bennett, he was very keen on this. He had lots of hierarchies and schemes. He said, he always warned in the end, don't get stuck up there. He said, each of these have their role, you see, and part of understanding and wisdom is knowing to each his own. What is it? We've got to have automatisms, for example. We've even got to have what people call bad emotions. Everything there, so you've got to find what the purpose is. And so for me, I think that, so his idea of cooperation between the levels is right. And this is obviously not an answer, but I'm just thinking of a fundamental element, which is not only in Gurdjieff, but people are sometimes surprised as in Gurdjieff, which to know that our idea of consciousness is in a way fucked. I mean, it's kind of, it's so askew. And I'm more and more going back to treating seriously what somebody like Gurdjieff says, he actually says this, he said, what you call consciousness is not consciousness at all. It is a fake. See, most people don't like that, hearing that at all. And he said, it's what you call your subconsciousness is a true consciousness. Now, I knew that years ago, but now I feel I begin to really understand it. You know, it actually is completely upside down to the ordinary view. So the practical side, well, semi-practical side of all this for me about the higher intelligence, it only begins, is concomitant with, how to say, all these words, letting go, opening, these are no good. None of, I always ask people to say, if people go around and say, have an open mind, I say, well, how do you do that? You know, just it kind of, if you open it too much, does it fall to the ground? Or what? You know, nonsense. People have these nonsense things. So what do I actually do? And so it is, I'm afraid it comes back to a theme which Gabe Bennett had, and it's the kind of theme where I'm completely ashamed of myself in front of it, or I want to kind of deny what he's saying, it's too hard, and so on. He always said, the only thing which matters is humility. But
you know what? You know, Tony, I think we have to also be humble in that we know we're kind of out of time. So right. I gave you a toughie there at the end, but I think you did a great job of encouraging us to question consciousness.
Please.
Open up to humility. But
even now it's happening. As you and I believe we're conscious, don't we? But it's an illusion.
Oh, all right. Well, let's wrap it up. So if you want to kind of close it out now with anything for your conference, it was wonderful to talk to you. I would thank you so much for this opportunity. I immediately could go on and talk to you for another few hours, and maybe we'll do that soon, hopefully.
Please, pretty please. You see, what we've been around, and we're grateful is with the machines and all the other factors. There's something, you see, we still don't understand what a human being is. And so I just want to leave it with, we've renewed this question, what is the purpose of life on Earth, especially human life? And we don't know the beginning. Imagine we know what we are, we don't, and it's just beginning. And let's help each other.
That's great. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Erik, for your patience and kindness. And then we put in the adverts about our books later on, don't we?
Okay. Yeah, good idea. And now I want to just do the little tag for the end for my show. So I'm just going to say thank you, and then you can say thank you, and we're done. So just be a second. So Tony, thanks so much for enjoying this conversation on Expanding Mind. It was great to have you.
Thank you, Erik. It's been a privilege and a delight and a joy.
And a joy. Excellent. All right. For all you out there, keep your minds open. Hey, thank you for that. That was good. That lets us, we did a 1-2 punch with this conversation. Really nice.
That's what I like. You see, I hate the word interview,
Yeah. Oh, no, it was great. It was super fun. I really loved it. I mean, but it's too short. That's the problem. Like with my show, it's an hour, and a lot of my listeners are like, oh, it's got to be longer. And I've started to do 2-parters where we go longer.
Yeah.
So I thought maybe we could have done that today, but I'd rather, this is good. Let's just percolate on some ideas. I would like to come back and hit more on this idea of consciousness, because inside spiritual culture, people who are seekers or whatever, there's such an emphasis on consciousness.
Right.
As a positive is what we're
sick.
doing.
It makes me sick.
So your critical question, hey, maybe this isn't what it is at all. And that much kind of more critical, subconscious, like we have to be really questioning of what this phenomenon is a really, I think, healthy thing to do. So maybe we can kind of start there and talk about, and I wanted to ask you about some Gurdjieff things that I think would be really helpful for people too, like how you think about what is self-remembering? What does that mean? What does it feel like?
Oh boy.
Things like that. So let's do this again. It might not.
Oh,
it
please.
might be
Is that a promise, Eric?
Okay.
Can I hold you to it?
Yes, we'll do it. It might not be
right.
for a couple of months, but we'll.
A couple of months. I can't wait that long.
Okay. Well, actually, you know what? We can record it sooner. It's just that I have a lot of shows already banked up, but I don't mind recording sooner.
Yeah.
Let's do that. Maybe 2 weeks. 2 weeks we'll probably do, because next week's really busy for me.
No, because I got to think of the.
Well, we'll do it in email.
Yeah, we'll sort it out. We do all that kind of stuff.
When is your conference?
Well, that's, you see, it's on the starts. I should be going to America on the 22nd.
Oh, okay.
You see, so
okay.
then
are you going to come back from there soon, or are you traveling for a while?
No, 22nd is there for 8 days or something, 7 or 8 days, and I come back to Scotland.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, then where do you live?
In Scotland.
Oh, where in Scotland?
Oh, you know Scotland. Well,
just a little bit.
Okay. You know the border between Scotland and England, it was mostly defined by the River Tweed.
Mm-hmm.
But the Tweed is sort of in my backyard. So
gotcha.
I can see Scotland across the river, and I'm pointing actually to it over there.
Lovely.
Don't suppose you ever get over here, do you?
I do. I've been to the UK probably a dozen times. I'm a bit of a UKophile. I won't even just say Anglophile, because I like the Scots too. But yeah, I've spent time in Scotland, and we like it. I hope I will be there next year sometime. I'm not sure for how long. I've always wanted to go up to travel in the Orkneys and to see.
The Orkneys! Yeah, God. What they discovered recently in the Orkneys is extraordinary. You know, all those new temples and.
I didn't know they made new discoveries.
Yeah, it was just about I don't know, 6 years ago, something like that.
Oh no! I just know it from
you know the stone circles.
Yes, that's why I want to go there.
And there was a spit of land between them. They started digging a spit of land and found a whole complex of temples. And not only that, they found that these complex was then demolished and they built a new kind of temple. Wow, because you
yeah, that's great.
I'm into that. Oh, I'm getting all goosebumpy now.
No, I love that stuff. We went to Argyllshire like a couple of years ago, and the stone circles there were just amazing.
And you know, this changed their attitude. They think that the whole kind of megalithic culture started in the Orkneys, right up there, and came down. I mean, Stonehenge was later.
Yeah, interesting. Wow.
All these movements of people and the great feasts they had, and that's related to, I'm trying to get my hand on it. Yeah, I'm very passionate. I just came across it. This, I don't know if you can read it. Can you read that?
Let's see. Oh, the memory code. Okay. Oh, ooh, that looks good.
Because you really love this, Eric. Because one thing about her was that she talks about those things, but she's done it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a great contrast. You probably know Frances Yates.
Mm-hmm.
And she's saying on the theatre of memory, but the contrast is extreme. And Frances Yates, I went back to it, the theatre of memory, she gives the classical description of it, where it comes from, which is very limited. And then she pops us off. I've never actually done any of this stuff, she says, and I don't think it's very good. I mean, that's all I meant to do. I don't think it's very good or useful. And I've never done any.
I know, but people know it works really well. You know, I just stumbled across a very interesting paper. I'll try to remember to send it to you. And it's about the way it's looking at what dreams do, but from a biological perspective, like a scientific, not a psychoanalytic perspective. But what she says is what's actually happening with dreams can best be understood as a kind of art of memory. So it's not that it's not the intentional construction of the art of memory, is that the art of memory is the language of associative intensities, and the weirdness of dreams is just the way that when you do art of memory, you remember things not with boring images, you remember gory images or erotic images, things that are intense. They help you remember things. And if we look at dreams as being one of the things that dreams does is to consolidate memories, the part of the weirdness of dreams is the mind kind of doing art of memory traces. It's a brilliant piece. It's really fascinating.
Oh, no, but this woman, her key for this book was Stonehenge. Because she'd done it in terms of pre-literate people, and she'd done the techniques in Stone, and she suddenly had the idea, this is a memory place. This is a memory device, which nobody had thought of before. Then she had to follow it up, so she follows it up.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I'll definitely check that out. I'm a big fan of that stuff. And yeah, and hopefully if we, I'd love to get up to Scotland. I have a couple friends up there. And so, maybe we'll be able to meet on the island.
on the island. Okay. Finally, about books, I mean, thrust it upon you, but you ought to take a look at my book on higher intelligence.
Yes, I will.
A special title I was very proud of, A Gymnasium of Beliefs in Higher Intelligence.
Oh my God, what a great title.
I've spent years trying to find the title to get it right.
Yeah,
I wanted to be right.
I need to, because I need to spend time with that concept, because I've been it's been part of my, as I said, I wrote about all these guys who felt like they encountered higher intelligence, and I tend to be very gun shy of such beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
But it's time to wrestle with them, and I think that the gymnasium sounds like a good place to work out.
Exactly right. Treat ideas as a workout.
Yeah, excellent.
If you don't sweat. Or
no.
Finally, it's not going to be final quote, but my favorite quotes from Nietzsche. Do you know this one? He said, you should treat great ideas like cold baths, quick in and quick out.
Yeah. I think that's very, very true. I think that's true of spiritual experiences as well.
Amen to that.
Yeah. If you got them, dive into the deep end of the pool, but pop out and get back in the sun.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. I should really go. This was wonderful.
I know.
And we'll be in touch through email.
Well, God bless.
Guys, very good. Bye-bye.
Bye.